Specialist, and I am also responsible for the Rabbit Project for the state of Texas. So I would like to welcome y'all to our first official Rabbit Workshop virtually. Unfortunately, we did have to cancel Extravaganza this year, but we are hoping that we will be able to do that again in 2021. I know the Rabbit Advisory Board, who many are on tonight, are hoping that we can get that done as well, but we wanted to make sure and bring y'all a educational series so that you're still getting some benefits of what we would have done at Rabbit Extravaganza. And so we welcome y'all to this. We're excited for our first one. And then of course, we'll have the 3 follow-up ones after this. I'm going to be dropping a link in the chat box, and I'm seeing that some of y'all may need to copy and paste that to be able to sign in. But please make sure that you sign into the meeting for every person who is watching at your house. That helps us have a better grasp on how many people are participating with us tonight. If you have any questions throughout, please feel free to put them in the chat, but we will do a question and answer session at the end of this meeting. So please know that. And then also, if y'all don't mind keeping your mics on mute while Dr. Hensley presents, that way we're not interrupting him. And then if you don't mind keeping your cameras off as well, and that way we don't bog down the system, because sometimes when there's too many cameras on, it freezes it up for other people. So we want to make sure everybody's able to see that. I am going to introduce Dr. Hensley and then give me a few minutes to get everything shared so that he's able to present with y'all. But Dr. Terry Hensley is joining us tonight. He works for Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Service as a veterinarian, but he is also the Assistant Laboratory Director at the Texas A&M Veterinary Medical Diagnostic Lab. And he did assist in writing the validation guidelines that we shared with everyone for this year. And he was gracious enough to be willing to join us tonight and talk to y'all a little bit about the rabbit hemorrhagic disease, which is going around right now, as well as just general biosecurity tips to make sure that you're keeping your rabbits safe from all diseases. And so I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Hensley, and I'm going to hit that link for y'all to sign in, and give us just a minute so that Dr. Hensley has control of his presentation, and we will get started. All right, I'm going to share the screen so that y'all can see the presentation. And it should be showing up now. Hopefully y'all are seeing that.
There it is.
Perfect. And then Dr. Hensley, I am getting ready to give you control of the screen.
Okay, let's see if it'll work.
And if not, I'll take it back over and you can just tell me when to advance to the next slide. Okay. But you should be able to have control now.
Okay. All right, good evening, everyone. Happy to be here this evening and talk to you a little bit about rabbit hemorrhagic disease virus and then about biosecurity. So I think we're gonna, there it is. All right, this thing's very sensitive, Megan, so I'll try to make sure I'm staying on the right slide here. So what I want to do this evening is go through RHDV and just talk to you a little bit about the virus and the disease, because I know there's a lot of information running around out there. Some of it very good information, some of it maybe not so good information. So when we get through with this, hopefully you will have learned some things maybe you didn't know before, and that it'll pique your interest to maybe dig a little deeper if you choose to do that. And once we finish talking about rabbit hemorrhagic disease, we'll touch on biosecurity a little bit, because I think that's a very important piece of this whole thing. Megan, are you still there?
Okay.
Yes, sir, I'm here. Would you like to take over control?
Well, I think you may have to control it. I don't know what it's doing.
Okay, sounds good. I will do that.
Emails and this meeting, I hope it's working.
If I can ask everyone to please mute their mics. All right, Dr. Hensley, I'm going to go ahead and advance the slide for you.
Okay, that's fine.
Ah,
Sorry about that. I just don't see.
You gotta eat those stuff.
no, we're not muted.
If everyone can please mute.
From Milo,
All right, so rabbit hemorrhagic disease, we're really talking about two very closely related viruses. They're really serotypes of each other. The first one that went around the world really, and it was even in the US a few times back in the 90s, was rabbit hemorrhagic disease virus. That was the original one. You see it sometimes called rabbit hemorrhagic disease virus 1 for a reason, because now the one we're dealing with here in the US is rabbit hemorrhagic disease virus 2. But both of these viruses, for the ones of you that like to dig down in the science of it, they're both caliciviruses, and they're in the genus Lagovirus. They only affect rabbits, don't affect other animals, and they don't affect humans. But they're serious, highly contagious viral diseases of rabbits. They spread very easy, and it's a hardy virus, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But these viruses, this rabbit hemorrhagic disease virus, is considered a foreign animal disease here in the US. And what that means is
hey
the US
guys.
Department of Agriculture monitors these
Just
diseases
unmute. Oh,
and tries,
reactions. Oh, that's cool.
Dr. Hensley, hold on just a second. I'm trying to get you unmuted.
Everybody's muted.
Yeah, everybody's muted. The host muted them.
Well, I unmuted himself. I unmuted us.
Please, if you're not muted, please do so. Dr. Hensley, can you unmute yourself now?
yeah.
There we go. Okay,
Yeah.
sorry about that, guys. Please remain on mute, guys. All right, Dr. Hensley, it's all yours.
I'm not really sure where I got muted, but it's a serious, highly contagious viral disease of rabbits. I think that's kind of where we got off track here. And this disease is considered a foreign animal disease here in the US because it's not a disease that normally occurs here. So the US Department of Agriculture, they have, I guess, oversight of dealing with this disease if it does enter the United States. Hence, you see things coming out from USDA as well as from the state veterinarian's office, because that's how it's been dealt with in the past. Rabbit hemorrhagic disease virus 1 was only in domestic rabbits, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, why it was a little bit different. So this virus emerged in Europe in the 70s and 80s. That was RHDV2, and it was only in European rabbits, which is the ancestor of most of our domestic rabbits over here. And by the late 90s, it had spread through about 40 different countries. The new virus, RHDV2, which we're dealing with here in the US now, that virus emerged in France in 2010. And the interesting thing is rabbits in Europe that had experienced RHDV1 and had survived, had antibodies, were not protected when they were exposed to RHDV2. So those two serotypes don't share immunity against one another, which is unfortunate. All right, let's go to the next slide, Megan.
You want to go over here, you have to do it too.
So rabbit hemorrhagic disease
Everyone what you
biosecurity, that's where we're really going to concentrate this evening.
They need to step in the face in a second.
It's a disease of lagomorphs, of rabbits and hares, both domestic and wild. And here's the difference between RHDV1 and RHDV2. The one virus did not affect our wild rabbits here in the United States. It only affected our domestic rabbits. Hence, it was much easier to control when it gained entrance to the U.S. because it was only in domestic rabbit facilities. This RHDV2 does affect our wild rabbits. It's already been confirmed in 2 species of jackrabbits, the antelope jackrabbit and the black-tailed jackrabbit. And it's been confirmed in the desert cottontail, eastern cottontail, and mountain cottontail. And we're not sure yet in some areas, such as New Mexico, they appear to have suffered tremendous losses in their wild rabbit population, primarily in the jackrabbits. We're not yet sure what that's going to do long term to wild rabbit populations, and we may talk about that in a little bit. And I'd mentioned before this slide that there's no cross protection between these 2 serotypes, so they don't confer antibodies that are protective against the other type of serotype. All right, Megan. So what's the timeline on RHDV2 here in the United States? You know, I said the first serotype had been in the US before, starting back in the 90s, and we were able to eradicate it each time it gained entrance to the US. But this new serotype, when it came into North America, the first time we know that it was here was in 2016, and that was in Quebec, Canada. Sort of disappeared, so to speak. 2018, showed up in Vancouver, on Vancouver Island in British Columbia, and in Ohio. And then in 2019, again in Vancouver, the city of Vancouver, and then on the San Juan Islands in Washington. And then in 2020, early in March, it was diagnosed in New York City, actually at a veterinary hospital that had, for some reason, a bunch of rabbits they were caring for. And then the latter part of March, it was diagnosed in New Mexico. It's not really, there's no epidemiology link yet that can be proven how this thing has managed to move around the country the way it has. But something has transported it, probably people moving rabbits or rabbit product around, possibly from place to place. So right now, currently, on the latest info from the USDA, we've got this virus active in Washington, Colorado, Utah, Arizona, California, Nevada, New Mexico, Texas, New York City, and also across the border in Mexico. We're having an issue with this virus in Mexico also. So it's moved around quite a bit, primarily in the Southwest, but it has moved quite a bit. And some of that could be because we're seeing it in wild rabbits in these states as well as domestic rabbits. Okay, Megan. So to look at a map, this is a map from USDA, and it just gives you an idea where it is. This is the most current map they have. There may be a few other spots that'll pop up next time they update.
What is that map saying?
But you can see it's in both domestic rabbits and wild rabbits in at least these 4 states that we're looking at right now, really 5, really 6 actually. There's a little bit there in California. But you can see those green shaded areas down across the border in Mexico. It's been diagnosed in quite a few of the Mexican states that border the US. So it's a pretty widespread disease outbreak actually when you look at this map. Okay, Megan. So if we look at the epidemiology, you know, I mentioned earlier about this virus being highly infectious. I think when we deal with a highly infectious virus, it just makes it more difficult for us to control it because it can spread so easily, and it really makes it that much more important that we do what we can from a biosecurity standpoint on our farms or rabbitries or whatever. So that's an important thing to remember. The other thing that's disheartening about this virus is it's extremely stable in the environment. There are some viruses that are, I guess you could say, wimpy viruses. They don't live but a few hours once they're outside the host. They just don't survive environmental conditions very well. Some of them can live for, you know, a day or two or maybe even a few weeks, but most viruses don't. This one can survive for weeks, if not months, outside of the rabbit. So it makes it that much easier to spread this virus, to track it around, and that makes it difficult to control. There's been some studies done where even in decaying tissue, it can live up to 90 days in that decaying tissue, which is pretty unusual for a virus to be able to last that long. So bottom line, highly contagious, highly infectious, and extremely stable in the environment. And those are the two things that we're fighting against with this disease. Okay, Megan. So if you look at incubation period, and an incubation period, for the ones of you that may not know, that's the time from infection to when you're going to show clinical disease. And that varies, but most rabbits, it's going to be anywhere from 3 days to 9 days. And there's always some outliers, you know, it'll be quicker and it may be longer. But that's the average time that it's going to take from when a rabbit is exposed or infected until it's going to show clinical disease. Rabbit hemorrhagic disease virus 2 affects young rabbits as well as adults and older rabbits. That's another difference between it and RHDV1. RHDV1, young rabbits seem to have a innate resistance to that virus. Rabbits that were under, you know, a few weeks old, maybe a month old, maybe 2 even, they were fairly protected against that virus for some reason. That doesn't mean that some of them didn't get sick. That's true, but for the most part, very young rabbits did not get sick from RHDV1. That's not the case with RHDV2. It seems to be able to affect young rabbits as well as adult rabbits. The clinical signs, you may have everything from death without any outward signs of disease. You go in your rabbitry one evening, everybody looks okay, come back the next morning, and there's a dead one or two without showing any signs. That's not the most common, but that does happen. If they are going to show clinical signs, many of them will have fever. They may die in 12 to 36 hours after they start to develop fever, but typically you're going to see a rabbit die from 1 to 3 days after they become clinical. Again, there's outliers, but that's the average. Some rabbits will develop a chronic illness. They won't die from this virus, but they'll be chronically ill from it, and they can linger for quite some time. And the whole time they're able to shed the virus, which makes that a little scary also. But the ones that are going to be clinically ill and they don't die very quickly, you may see depression, you see anorexia where they go off feed, they're not wanting to eat. You see conjunctivitis or inflammation around the lining of the eyelids. You'll see respiratory signs. You may see hemorrhage around the eye, ocular hemorrhage. may see epistaxis, which is bloody nose. They'll bleed from the nose, and you can see blood and feces on some of these rabbits. The post-mortem, the lesions we would see after death, if we do a necropsy or an autopsy on one of these rabbits, the primary lesion we see is hepatic or liver necrosis. It's damage to the liver. We also see liver in the spleen, or lesions in the spleen, and we may see congestion like some bloody fluid in the lungs and other internal organs, hence the name hemorrhagic virus, because it can result in this widespread internal hemorrhage for various reasons. And we will dig down into the pathology of that, but that's what we're going to see. Now, there's some rabbits that will be subclinical, meaning they're not going to show any signs of disease. They don't act sick. They don't show any signs of illness. And I think we can recognize that from what we're seeing, you know, with the COVID situation we're dealing with now in people. There's people walking around that are subclinical. They're infected with COVID, but they don't have any clinical signs, but they're still able to shed the virus and maybe infect people around them. Well, that's the same with a rabbit with RHDV2 that's subclinical. They're not showing any disease, but yet they're shedding the virus. There's not a high percentage of them that do that, but some have been known to be subclinical. Okay, Megan. So how is it transmitted? How does it go from rabbit to rabbit? It can spread through direct contact with infected rabbits. And that rabbit can be alive, or that infected rabbit can be dead. We talked about how long it can survive in a carcass. So a dead rabbit can still be infectious if other rabbits have access to that carcass. So they can have nose to nose or nose to body contact from that dead animal. It can still be spread that way because it's highly infectious and because it's stable in the environment, which we talked about earlier. But I put it in here again because I think that's important for us to remember with this virus. So if you look at where is it found in the body and how is it coming out of the body, basically, it's found in basically all the secretions and excretions of an infected rabbit. So that means the urine, the feces, the saliva, the blood, and respiratory secretions. So that virus is coming out in all those secretions and excretions. Another reason what makes it actually highly infectious. The rabbit becomes, the uninfected rabbit becomes infected from several different ways. It can be oral, it can be through respiratory, you breathe, that rabbit breathes it in. It can be conjunctival, meaning the mucous membranes, the lining around our eye and eyelid is a very good way to absorb things. So COVID virus can spread that way in our eyes. Conjunctiva can be a source of entry for this virus too, and skin trauma. If they had a wound and it was an open type wound, that virus could gain entry through that wound. And I highlighted oral because it seems like, looking at data from Europe and then maybe what we've seen so far here, although most of this is going to come from European experience, the oral route seems to be the most common way that these rabbits are becoming infected. But this virus can live long enough in the meat, especially if a carcass is frozen. That virus can be maintained for quite some time that way and could eventually affect some other rabbits. It can be on the fur, it can be in bedding material, it can be in the water if the water gets contaminated. So there's a host of ways that this virus can spread from rabbit to rabbit and from facility to facility. If you look at that last one, talks about insect scavengers. they're feeding on a carcass, or they're feeding on contaminated feed sources, or debris in a cage, you know, the feces and so forth, if it's an infected rabbit has been in that cage. Scavengers that feed on dead rabbits, and this is mainly coming from wild rabbits, that virus can pass through their system and be passed out the other end in their feces. Now, how long it lasts there, I'm not sure, but it's been shown that it can spread that way. So those are all sources that we have to pay attention to, and we'll talk a little bit about some of this control of these type of things when we look at biosecurity. But that's the primary transmission methods and routes that this virus takes. Okay, Megan. So diagnostic testing. We get questions here at the lab about testing rabbits for RHDV2. One way to begin this is clinical signs. Normally, it's an observant rabbit owner that has an ill rabbit, or they see signs and they've read up and they think, well, this is possible. Hopefully, they're going to talk to their veterinarian and see about getting some diagnostics done. We actually can take samples, bodies from owners. We prefer them come through a veterinarian. It's easier that way. But clinical signs may tip you off that you possibly have a problem. Then if we get a rabbit here, and we're going to do a necropsy and hopefully histopathology, which is where we've collected tissues, and then we do some special stains and processing, and we look at those tissues under the microscope. So the rabbits that we've done so far at the lab, some of them are submitted and we really don't see lesions that are consistent once we open the animal up and we do histopath. Others, we've seen those lesions that make us highly suspicious that it could be rabbit hemorrhagic disease. And then if we see histopath, if we see microscopic lesions that confirm that, then we're really suspicious that it could be RHDV2. But that's not a confirmatory diagnosis. That's only saying what we're seeing is consistent with that virus. But there's other diseases and conditions in rabbits that could cause similar type lesions. So that's not a confirmatory test. There is a test offered at the Foreign Animal Disease Lab, USDA's Foreign Animal Disease Lab, where they can test for antibodies in the blood of a rabbit. And an antibody test merely tells you that rabbit was exposed to that virus, its immune system responded, and it built antibodies. It's really not telling us that's what killed the rabbit. It's telling us it had been exposed to the virus, or a vaccine, actually. So the confirmatory test for this virus is a polymerase chain reaction test. And that's a molecular-based test that looks for the nucleic acid, the DNA, RNA of this virus. It's a very sensitive test and a very specific test. At this time, we're not running that test here at TVMDL, but again, the Foreign Animal Disease Diagnostic Laboratory on Plum Island, New York, they're running it, USDA's running it at no cost. So the rabbits we've had that met these other guidelines on necropsy and histopath, maybe clinical signs, we submit tissue to FA, to the Foreign Animal Disease Lab for the PCR. And what we submit is a piece of liver and spleen. Those are the two best organs to run this PCR test on. And that's where we get confirmation that that's what it is. You know, if this virus stays in the US, I'm sure we may look into it. Other labs will look into maybe running that, developing that PCR, adopting that technology run here. But right now, we do not offer that, but we send it to Fattle for that test. Okay, Megan. So I've got some pictures here. Hopefully it doesn't offend anybody or gross anybody out, but I thought since we're talking disease, we ought to show you what we're seeing and what's going on inside that rabbit and why it is fatal in a lot of cases. The mortality rate varies. Anywhere from, reports here in the US so far, which we still don't have a lot of historical evidence yet, but over in Europe, it can range from as low as 5% up to 70 or 80%. I think what they're saying, they average probably about 20% mortality across the board with this virus. RHDV2 may have actually mutated some. There's some disease researchers in Europe that thinks the mortality rate is actually higher now than it was in the beginning. So these viruses do have the ability to mutate. Sometimes they become more pathogenic. Sometimes they become less pathogenic. But right now, we don't have a lot of good evidence to say what it's going to do in the domestic rabbit facility right now. I said New Mexico has reported widespread losses in wild rabbits, and that could very well be true. But clinical signs, that rabbit up there on the left, I talked about epistaxis or nosebleeds, and that's sort of the classic thing. They don't all show that, but if you see that, it would be highly suspicious for rabbit hemorrhagic disease virus. Any disease that causes septicemia or widespread body infection and disruption of the coagulation system can result in that. But that is sort of a classic sign for this disease, to see that bleeding out the nose like that. The next rabbit, where they're opening up the eyelids, you can see that red area. That's hemorrhage in the conjunctiva. Again, pretty classic sign. If you see it, they will show it. Next picture is the heart. Again, it's showing some areas of hemorrhage on the epicardium, the muscle surface of the heart, kind of classic lesions. Next, upper right, that's the lungs been extracted. That open area with the white frothy, that's the trachea. And it's got a lot of froth in it, meaning there was a lot of fluid in that rabbit's lungs, which creates that frothiness when they're trying to breathe. And you see the dark red areas, that's hemorrhage in the lungs. Hence you get that wet fluid lung. Again, when you see that, we're thinking very good possibility of this disease. Far left on the bottom, that's the liver. May be hard to notice this if you haven't looked at many livers, but it's swollen. The edges are rounded, not sharp. And you can see some discolored areas in the liver. That's areas of necrosis where the liver has started to break down. And that's one of the classic signs in this disease is liver necrosis. And that's one of the primary organs that we target for the PCR, because it's often loaded with virus. In the middle on the bottom, that's the spleen. Again, maybe hard to realize this, but that spleen is enlarged. It's very turgid or swollen. And again, it's sort of dark colored, which is abnormal. And then on the bottom right, that's a cross section of the kidney, showing quite a bit of hemorrhage within that kidney. Again, this disease causes hemorrhagic problems. It affects the clotting system and so forth. So you get a lot of hemorrhage around the body, especially if you have the classic signs. And back when we talked about clinical signs, you know, they'll range from all of this going on in a rabbit probably dies very quickly to less severe, and those rabbits may have that chronic infection. And then some rabbits, for whatever reason, their immune system is able to deal with this virus, and they will be aclinical or subclinical. They won't be showing any signs of disease, but yet they're still able to spread some virus to the rabbit. Okay, Megan. So treatment, well, sad to say there really is no treatment. It's a viral disease. We have no cure for this disease. There may be, on rabbits that are not severely affected, maybe some symptomatic treatment that your veterinarian could try. That's not that much different from other viral diseases. We do symptomatic treatment, and we hope that the animal's own immune system, own body can fight it off with a little help from treating the symptoms, and they can survive. But bottom line, there's not a whole lot we can do with rabbits that are infected with this virus once they become clinically ill. So sad to say that not much encouragement on that front at the moment. Okay, next slide. So vaccine, I know that's been a big topic in the U.S., and I know here in Texas there's been a lot of chatter about vaccine, and we don't have a vaccine here in the United States, but they do in Europe. So that's not changed. There's no licensed vaccine for rabbit hemorrhagic disease virus 2 or 1 here in the U.S. But Europe has 2 killed vaccines. One of them is Filovac, produced by Filovie, and the other one is Aravac, produced by Hipra. Those 2 vaccines, since they're kill vaccines, USDA has allowed under special, I guess, regulations for those 2 vaccines to be imported into the United States. And it's under the jurisdiction of the state veterinarian. So even though USDA says it's okay, following the import guidelines, if the state vet says no, then they're not going to supersede that. But Texas is allowing that. And I reached out to one of my colleagues at the Animal Health Commission this afternoon, and it looks like there's about 11,000 doses of vaccine. At least that's how many have been approved to be imported into Texas. That's based on paperwork that veterinarians have filed with the Animal Health Commission gaining approval to import these vaccines. Could be a little more than that, but that's the last he could tell me. It was about 11,000 doses. There's a 3rd vaccine in Europe, but it is a live vaccine, and so it's not allowed to be imported into the United States. So we have these 2 that are available, I guess, depending on what the supply is. So it's an emergency protocol, and again, it's under USDA is the ultimate overseer of that, but it's down to where each state veterinarian can decide about their own state. I've kind of talked about these other 2. You need a special permit, and these vaccines, because they're under special approval or to be administered by a licensed veterinarian, or at least under their supervision of a licensed veterinarian. Okay, Megan. So kind of end here on rabbit hemorrhagic disease, and in my mind, there's a few big questions that's going to need to be answered about this disease. One of them is this virus going to become endemic in North America? And when we say endemic, that means it's here. it's here to stay. It's going to be seen every year or every few years because it's still going to be circulating around either in wild rabbits or maybe in some domestic rabbits. When West Nile virus came in, y'all remember back that far, we were thinking it would be eradicated and it wouldn't stay here. Well, we know how that worked out. But this one, there's a possibility that it won't survive and it'll still be considered a foreign animal disease. But my own opinion, because it is such a hardy virus and because this serotype has been able to infect our wild rabbits, that it may always be here in North America. So it may become endemic. Only time will tell what's going to happen there. So if it does become endemic, then will biosecurity and use of vaccines, if we're allowed to do that, is that going to be the tools we need to control it in domestic rabbits? We can't use those things in wild rabbits, but we could in domestic rabbits. So maybe if it's here, we can use those two tools to control it in our domestic rabbit populations. And the bottom line, because I like wildlife issues, what's going to be the long-term effects on our wild rabbit populations and the predators that utilize that as their primary prey species. There are some areas in Europe where the wild rabbit population did bounce back, and there's some areas over there where it didn't bounce back. It's still at a very low level, and it has had an impact on the predators that utilize rabbits as one of their main species. So that's a question from the wild rabbit population point of view, I guess. So, okay, Megan, I think the next one will kind of start on biosecurity. All right, so biosecurity, most of you probably know what biosecurity is. I hope you do if you're raising any kind of animals, farm animals, whatever. So in bottom line is it's the practice of protecting your animal from disease. So you're trying to use a security type system to keep a biological agent out of your animal population. Or you could say it's infectious disease control. Bottom line, that's really what it is. So all the measures that you take to lower the risk of introducing infectious diseases onto the farm or into your group of animals, that's biosecurity. That's your biosecurity program. And I think many times people hear biosecurity and then they look at something or they go to a talk and there's 40 different steps and things they need to do to institute a biosecurity program, and their eyes glaze over and they get discouraged because they can't do all those things. So they just sort of give up. I want to take it from a different tact here. Yes, we can make this list as long as our leg. We can look at programs, the swine industry and the commercial poultry industry. Probably you could say they're the gold standard. They're the facilities where you shower in, you have all of these precautions in place. That's the ideal, ultimate, state-of-the-art biosecurity plan. Most people, can't do that. So my take is, if we've got 10 things here and you look at them and you say, well, I can't do those. But if you look at it again and you say, well, I could do this and this. So you can do 2 out of the 10. You're 2 steps closer to keeping disease out of your animals. So I think anything you can do to help ensure biosecurity, you're a step ahead. So don't get discouraged. Do what you can, and you're better off doing that. So introduction of disease into a group of animals can be by animals. You're moving animals in and out. It may be people. It's on your clothes or on your shoes. It may be equipment that you move from one place to another. Could be on your vehicle. Either you've driven through poop that had virus in it and it's stuck in your wheels, and now you drive it and it comes out once it gets on your place, or it's in the bed of the truck or whatever. Could be on a feed source that you brought in. Shows are places with increased risk of acquiring an infection. I don't care if it's a rabbit, a chicken, a cow, a horse, pig, whatever it is. Shows have increased risk of disease spread. Why? We commingle animals from various sources. Why do we have disease problems when school starts? Not even talking about COVID. It's because now we've got kids coming from all different homes and they're all coming together. So these viruses tend to spread easier. And while you're at a show, these animals are under stress. May not look like it, but most of them are under stress because everything's different. When you're under stress, your immune system doesn't function as well as it should. Again, so that increases their risk of acquiring something. So if we adopt some simple steps or precautions, everything we adopt, we can help minimize the risk of this happening. But I think we have horses, and so it doesn't make any difference on the animal. But if you're going to show, or if you're going to go to any kind of event where you commingle your animals, you have to accept this risk. And I tell people, you know, if you can't accept that risk, you probably don't need to show. But it is a risk there. But we're going to show some things that you can do to maybe help reduce that risk. So let's go to the next slide, Megan. So some recommendations: don't allow pet or wild rabbits contact with your rabbits. The wild rabbit piece is very important now with RHDV2, not so much with other diseases, but with this one because it's in the wild rabbits. And I've talked to a couple of people. It's almost 100% guaranteed that's where it came from in their rabbits, was some wild rabbits. But other pet rabbits, don't let them into your rabbitry. You know, you need to try to protect that. If you've got your show rabbits or outside, maybe under a lean-to or whatever, you may need to put up a little rabbit fence around there to keep wild rabbits, if you have wild rabbits in your area, from coming up there, because there's a chance they could bring in rabbit hemorrhagic disease virus. You don't need to go exterminate all the wild rabbits. What you need to do is just put up something that's going to protect that interaction between those rabbits. One of the cases we dealt with back a month or so ago, this family had show rabbits at their house. They had a horse barn a mile or so away, and I guess maybe when rabbits got older, they weren't going to be good enough to show. They'd take some of them down to the horse barn, and they just turned them loose, and they lived around the barn, evidently, is what she told me. Well, one of those rabbits died, then another one died, and then another one was sick and almost dead. So they took one in to their veterinarian, and he sent it to us, and sure enough, it was rabbit hemorrhagic disease virus 2. And I asked her, do you see wild rabbits around here? She said, yeah, every now and then we see wild rabbits. They come up here around the barn too. So that was most likely the source. Now at that time, they had not had any disease in their show rabbits at the house. I think they were lucky and they dodged the bullet that they didn't carry something back on their feet or their clothes from the horse barn to the house, especially if they went straight in to take care of the rabbits. But that's an example of how we have to be thinking and protect our show rabbits from potential contact with wild rabbits. Don't collect outdoor forage for your rabbits. And people say, well, why is that? Well, because outdoor forage, you go pluck plants because you want your rabbits to have some greenery, Could have been a wild rabbit there. Maybe he slobbered on it, maybe he urinated on it. You're not going to see that or know that. But that virus is still viable, still alive, and you harvest some of this and you take it in and feed it to your show rabbits, you could technically, theoretically transmit that virus. So it's a good idea. Don't be doing that now with this virus around. Don't allow visitors in your rabbitry without protective clothing. Some may say, well, I can't do that. The thing of it is, if they have rabbits and they come to your place to look at rabbits or to buy rabbits or whatever, they could bring something on themselves into your rabbitry. So if that has to happen, the best thing is to have a clean pair of coveralls there that you ask them to put on, and either some booty covers or some boots that they can take their shoes off and put on and wash their hands good with warm soapy water, and you've reduced the risk many-fold that they're going to bring something into your rabbits because you've done that little bit of biosecurity right there. Practice fly and rodent control. We know that insects and rodents can transmit this virus. It doesn't infect them. Flies that are feeding on feces or on dead rabbit, rodents that have been doing the same thing, that virus could be on them or in them. And flies, after they feed, kind of gross, but they go and they defecate and they vomit basically. And so whatever they've eaten, that virus can come out that way. Rats can track it around on their feet. So practice fly control, rodent control at your rabbitry, and that's another biosecurity step you can do. And most of these, all of these really help with any disease, not just rabbit hemorrhagic disease. You got a lot of other stuff that's probably at higher risk to your rabbits than this virus is. So it's good for all of these things. If you're gonna have to buy new rabbits, you ought to hold those rabbits separate for 30 days. And this is where a lot of people say, I can't keep a rabbit or a horse or a cow separate for 30 days. Well, do the best you can. If you can't keep them separate, but 10 days, you've done more than just sticking them straight in your rabbitry with all the other rabbits. So quarantine or separate new stock for up to 30 days if you can. If not, do the best you can. Sanitize equipment and cages that are moved off the premise before you return them back to the rabbitry. So if you take cages, other equipment somewhere else, before you stick them back into your premise or into your building, clean and sanitize those pieces of equipment before they go back in there. Isolate sick rabbits. That should be common sense, but you may not have a way to get them totally out, but separate them as best you can. And one of the biggest things to do is care for them last. You go from the lowest risk individuals to the highest risk individuals. So you care for your little rabbits, your young rabbits, then the next stage rabbits, and if you've got a sick rabbit, you take care of them last. You don't move things, you don't move disease from the sick rabbit to the other healthy rabbits. And again, isolate them best you can. Next slide, please. So a little bit of things here for shows, because I know that this group is, of course, that's why you're in it. You're gonna show your rabbits, and that's great. I think it's a great project. So if you're going to be going to a show, prior to a show, you want to evaluate the health of your rabbits. Should be looking at them every day, really. But for sure, those rabbits that you're going to be taking to a show to be sort of commingled. I know they're in cages, but they're right there pretty much next to each other. You want to make sure those rabbits at least look healthy and act healthy, or don't take them. I mean, bottom line. You want to take the equipment you take. If you have to take your own cages and so forth, you want to make sure you're only taking clean and disinfected equipment to the show, because you don't want to pack something there that may infect, your buddy that's next to you. So clean and disinfect your stuff before you take it off your place to the show. During the show, monitor your rabbits daily. I'm sure you're doing that because you got hands on, you've got to care for them. So you want to look for any sign of illness in that rabbit. And if you see it, I think you need to notify the rabbit superintendent, or maybe the show veterinarian if they have one, and see what they want to do. But if that animal really is showing signs of illness, to me, it needs to go home and cut your risk and take it out of there and get it back to where where you live. Avoid contact with other rabbits. I know that's easier said than done, but you're better off if you don't handle your buddy's rabbits. You don't borrow feed, you don't borrow water bowls, food bowls, you don't borrow grooming equipment. You're really trying to do things and to cut down that risk. And I know when you're there and you're in a group and it's your friends and stuff, but it's not being a bad friend to not want to share your food and water bowls with them or your grooming equipment with them. You're trying to do something that's going to reduce the risk of sharing disease or spreading diseases. I know when we carry horses places, they don't drink out of the community water trough. We carry water, we have a hose that we hook up to the water hydrant, because if you use the hose that's hooked up to the show hydrant, that end of that hose has been stuck in somebody's bucket. So it's little things that we tend to not think about, but all those things just cut down the risk of spreading disease. And then you want to wash your hands frequently or disinfect them, because if you have to, help someone with their rabbit, whatever, just wash up good before you go back to your rabbits. Next slide. So after the show, you get ready to go home. Again, you need to try to isolate your show rabbits from the rest of the rabbits you have at the house. I say at least 7 to 10 days, because I honestly don't know many people that can isolate for 30 days. But again, like I said earlier, if you can do it for a week, most infectious diseases, you're going to see some sign that rabbit's not doing well within 7 to 10 days. And then you can for sure get them isolated. Isolate them far as you can. At least keep them to where they can't have nose-to-nose contact with each other. Further the better. But again, here's the deal. You do the best you can in your situation, and that's all you can do, and you feel good about it because you've done what you can do. Care for returning rabbits last. We talked about that, going from lowest risk to highest risk, and don't share food equipment or any other equipment between those rabbits that just came home and the rest of your rabbits. And you're going to watch for signs of illness on a daily basis. If you see a sick rabbit, I would say contact your veterinarian, talk to them, see what they advise you to do. You want to clean and disinfect all the equipment, your shoes, your cages, everything that you took to that show that you're going to be using now once you get home. Clean it and disinfect it, so hopefully you don't bring something back on one of these objects, not on a rabbit, but in one of the inanimate objects that you use. Cleaning and disinfecting, I think it's important to make a point, because we all forget this. You've got to clean it, thoroughly clean it before you can disinfect it. Disinfectants don't work by spraying something that's dirty. It can't get through the dirt, the feces that may be stuck to it, whatever, hair, all that stuff. Disinfecting won't work when you do it that way. So the first thing is clean it. Wash it down, scrub it down with soap and water. Then you can disinfect it. So that's an important thing to remember, and I think we all forget that sometimes. Next slide, Megan. So disinfectants, I just put one here. Everybody has household bleach. It's easy to use. It kills this virus and really most other viruses. The only thing about bleach, it's hard on metal, so you got to make sure you rinse it off well once you've let it sit there long enough. So rule of thumb, you can put a half a cup of bleach in a gallon of water, or if you want to mix up smaller amounts, just 1 part bleach and 9 parts water. And that'll give you the right dilution that's going to kill most viruses. The contact time for any disinfectant is important. And what that is, that's the time that disinfectant needs to be in contact with whatever surface you're treating for at least 5 minutes. It takes that long for it to kill this virus. Now, if you're in the arid part of the state, stuff's going to dry way before 5 minutes is up. So you may have to squirt it down with some more bleach solution to keep it moist during that 5-minute period. So you've got active bleach working on that surface. And then you can rinse it down good with cold water. So you get the bleach off of it and you don't get as much risk of corrosion on your metal surfaces. Bleach solution really needs to be mixed up every 24 hours because the bleach starts to lose its effectiveness from just reaction with oxygen and so forth. So need to mix it up about every 24 hours. There's a couple of other disinfectants that can be used, and they're very good. I just don't know how accessible they are to the average person on the street. But Vercon S, we use that one quite a bit. And Rescue, I've never used that one, but it's supposed to be a good one too. So those are some disinfectants that you could use. Next slide, please. All right, so that was it. Hopefully that was some information that you can utilize. Hopefully it was some new information. Maybe you learned something tonight. Some of that you may already knew, but it's good to reinforce some of those things. So again, I appreciate the opportunity to visit with you guys, and hopefully you have good success with your rabbit projects. And I guess, Megan, I don't know if there's questions or they can email me.
Yes, sir.
Whatever.
Yes, sir. Dr. Hensley, I wrote down several questions that came in while you were talking. That way we didn't interrupt you.
Okay.
So I'm going to go down that list so that everyone can hear what those were and what answers you can provide them with.
Okay.
They are thanking you, by the way. They're sending great presentation. They're excited that they got this information. But the first question was, can RHDV2 be transmitted from state to state?
Yes, it can, and we're fairly certain that's how it's moved around from place to place. If you carry it on a rabbit that possibly is not sick yet, you know, that incubation period was 1 to 3 days, so the rabbit is infected, but he's not yet sick, but that doesn't mean he's not yet able to maybe be spreading that virus. So it could be carrying a rabbit, it could be carrying a product. You know, we said it can survive in rabbit and meat. So yeah, it could go from state to state, and we're fairly certain it has. We just don't have those, or USDA doesn't have those epidemiological links that definitively says this is how it came from source A to source B. But now it's in wild rabbits. Wild rabbits don't care about the state line. So they can probably move it around too.
Yes, sir. The next question they had is there a breed that is more susceptible to our RHDV2 than others?
Not that I know of. I have not seen that published, at least. We know the European rabbits are probably the most susceptible, And that's where, you know, I'm not a rabbit breeder, but I think, and someone can correct me, I think that's where most of our domestic rabbits, if not all of them, came from over the eons of time. But I haven't seen anything where a certain breed of domestic rabbit is more susceptible. That may come out, and it wouldn't surprise me actually if it did. But right now, I do not know that answer to that question.
Okay. The next question they had is, can it be transmitted to other species who might consume it in the wild?
Not that we know of. This virus is considered a rabbit virus. As far as we know, it does not infect the predators that eat these rabbits, doesn't infect humans. And I did say, you know, some of these predators may be able to actually spread some virus because they consume an infected rabbit and it passes through their system, does not cause them any damage. When they defecate, there could be virus in that poop, and it's very hardy. It can survive in nature for a while. So that's a possibility, but no, there's no evidence that it infects and causes disease in other animals other than rabbits.
All right. The next question was, you mentioned a kill vaccine. What exactly does it mean by a kill vaccine?
Well, when vaccine companies produce vaccines, we have really two different types. We have killed, where the virus is treated in a way that it cannot cause disease any longer, but they preserve the part of the virus that stimulates our immune system. So when you're vaccinated with a killed virus, if it works correctly, it still should stimulate you to produce antibodies, but there's no way it can cause disease. And that's why people, you know, you'll hear people say, well, I took the flu vaccine and it caused me to get the flu. That is complete bogus. It can't do it because it's a killed vaccine they're using in it. So it can't cause disease. Then there is what we call live or modified live. Sometimes it's treated to weaken it. Those vaccines really stimulate better immunity in the animal, but they still could, under the right circumstances, cause disease. They actually do cause a low-grade disease in the animal, and that's what stimulates the immune system really well. So that's the two differences. The virus is treated when it's a kill virus vaccine, so there's no way it can cause disease. And then a modified live or live vaccine normally doesn't cause severe disease, but it's still alive. It's been modified or weakened, so to speak, but it could still cause some disease, but
Okay.
it stimulates the best immunity.
All right. Between the two vaccines that are coming out of Europe, is there one that's more effective? And then how likely do you think we could get a US manufactured vaccine?
Well, I haven't seen anything that really says one's better than the other one. That's like most vaccines we use in livestock. You know, some veterinarians, you know, I'm included in that on my horses. I like one over another, but they all work. And sometimes it's just personal choice. You think the vaccine maybe doesn't cause an injection site problem or whatever, but I've not seen anything that says one of these is going to be better, you know, than the other one. As we utilize these, there may be some evidence that comes out. It may be anecdotal, where a veterinarian or a rabbit producer says, you know, I think that one was better or whatever. But no, I haven't seen anything that says that. And the second part of that question, to get a vaccine here in the United States, one of the pharmaceutical companies will have to see the need. It's very expensive to get these vaccines going. Now, if it's one of these companies in Europe that finds a distributor here in the US and they do whatever it is that USDA, requires for a vaccine to be sold here in the U.S. That to me would be a possibility to do it that way. But regardless, the companies have, it comes down to finances. They have to see that there's a big enough need for them to do the investment to get that done, if that makes sense.
Yes, sir, that does make sense. The next question they had is RHDV2 classified as endemic on a state-by-state basis, or is it nationally?
Usually it's national, and I guess we could have a disease that becomes endemic in one state. But normally, when it's a foreign animal disease like this, where it doesn't exist in the United States, normally that's a USDA sort of a decision, because it impacts, any of these foreign animal diseases impact trade. It could impact rabbit meat that's being sent internationally. Certain diseases impact our beef that's being shipped out of here. So all of these things have much greater impact than what we think sometimes. It involves international trade. Rabbits, of course, it's not a huge, I don't think, amount of rabbit meat that leaves the U.S., but whether it's endemic or not, I think is probably going to be decision of USDA. Now, the states will play a part of that, but I think over time, if we keep seeing it pop up, whether it's in domestic rabbits or we keep seeing it pop up in wild rabbits, sooner or later, I think we're going to have to say it's endemic. Now, they could say it's not present in our domestic population, but it's present in our wild population. And there's ways, for USDA to do some things like that, I think. But yeah, pretty much basically it's a national decision, I think.
Okay. With the 4-H program and how they go about selecting rabbits for show, we have a lot of situations where a volunteer will either ask kids to bring their rabbits together so they can help them select the best ones for show. In this situation right now that we're in, how would you recommend they go about helping youth select rabbits to be biosecure with their animals?
Well, that's a very good question. I don't know that we have a great answer. I think where you have to do something like that, I think if we do the best we can, if you touch one rabbit and then you go touch another one, you just have to sort of disinfect your hands in between. If you can keep the rabbits somewhat separate, let's say you're bringing them to a building or whatever, and that's where you're going to do this. Keep them in, separate. Each kid's got them in a separate cage, and try to keep as much distance as you can. It's not perfect, and you can't reduce all that risk. But I think some of those minimal things, if that's something that needs to be done when they're selecting rabbits, that's how I would suggest doing it. Maybe I don't understand the exact process there really, but I think when they were bringing them in, I know one of the counties around here, when they were bringing them in to, I guess they get their tattoos and stuff, they separated, gave them specific times when they could bring their rabbit, and they disinfected everything and all of that. So am I even getting close to what the question was?
Yes, sir. Yes, you are. You are hitting it right on the head there. So I
just think right now, you have to do the best you can again, but doing some of those simple things, it doesn't eliminate the risk, but it reduces it.
Yes, sir. And then the last question that came through in the chat box while you were talking was pretty specific. It was from a certain 4-H member who said, what do you recommend that they do for hay? They store their hay for about 3 months before feeding it. Is it still safe at that point?
It is safe if you can, put something, and rabbits, they're not like some of our other animals. If you depending on how your hay is stored, if you can put a little rabbit fence around it, if it's open like that to where wild rabbits can come around or whatever, I think you're doing what you can do. So the hay, really, if it's stored like that, should be a very minimal risk to you. I guess you could get to the extreme and saying, well, how do we know that there wasn't rabbit poop or remains of some rabbit that got baled up in the hay and stuff? I guess that's always possible, but I wouldn't lose any sleep over that. What I try to do with my stored hay is just ensure that you have it protected where wild rabbits can't come and nest in there or, graze on the hay or whatever. And you could do that with a simple little rabbit fence, I would think.
Yes, sir. And then I did miss one, and it was, how did the virus, the RHDV2, actually get to the United States or to any other country from where it originally started?
That if I could answer that question, maybe I could retire. We don't know, honestly. We never have actually figured out how these little outbreaks have gotten into the U.S. And USDA has done epidemiologically what they can to trace these back, and we haven't been able to figure that out. There's some thought that they could have been brought in a rabbit meat product. Some countries eat some of these meat products and they may be smoked or whatever. And some of these viruses can actually survive some of that processing. They're ethnic foods, maybe from another country. It could have been, brought in some other kind of product, I guess, or smuggled in rabbit. That's a possibility. They may be coming from south or maybe from the Caribbean. So we don't know, bottom line, we don't know how it got here.
Okay. Well, Dr. Hensley, I again cannot thank you enough for joining us tonight and talking to everyone. All the comments coming in, they're saying that they're glad they joined. You gave some really great information. So on behalf of Texas 4-H, I do want to thank you for your time. I know you're a busy man right now, so I appreciate you taking time to joining us. And for those of y'all still on the call, you'll receive a separate link for the next meeting. And once the recording's set, we'll be sure to share that with y'all. But we do appreciate you, Dr. Hensley, and we look forward to working with you in the future.
Well, I appreciate it, and I enjoyed being able to do this. And again, wish all the kids good luck in their rabbit projects. And if I can help you other ways, let me know.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to cut out, I think.
Yes, sir. All right, again, I want to just thank everybody for joining us tonight. We'll be sending some follow-up emails with an evaluation as well as your next Zoom meeting link. It'll be a different one for the next meeting. So be on the lookout for that. But I appreciate y'all all coming in, and we will see y'all in 2 weeks. Thank you and have a good night.